this year, we have dedicated much of our programming to the work of Eslanda Robeson. As we culminate this year-long celebration of the large and unconventional life of Mrs. Paul Robeson, we wanted to draw attention to her global mission of unity and solidarity with people all around the world, especially in Africa and Asia. At a time in the 20th century that information was just opening up, thanks to new technologies in communication and transportation, Eslanda Robeson was deeply immersed in the challenge to build understanding and define for herself what it means to be a fully empowered citizen. Through her travels and career, the friendships she made with world leaders and critical thinkers were remarkable. The archival record of her life's work that is now available to us includes pictures and letters, radio broadcasts, and books that give us a fresh perspective on the times and pressures shaping the society when she lived. This podcast shares a small set of insights we gained from reading Eslanda's life, the power of a global mindset, and the unique opportunities and education we get from making friends whose backgrounds are different from our own. This is the Paul Robeson House of Princeton podcast, where we are working to make Robeson a household name. I am Dr. Joy. In the opening pages of her biography, Lovely One, Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson writes, "If Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had presented our nation with a metaphorical check come due during his I Have a Dream speech in 1963, it is my generation that gratefully reaped the first installment. In many ways, we were the first inheritors of the deferred dreams of Dr. King and so many other stalwart predecessors." I couldn't agree more. Like Justice Jackson, I was born in 1970 and grew up in diverse schools. One of my first friends and classmates in fourth grade was a girl named Ajanta Guha, an Indian girl who celebrated my name because it meant something that we could all understand. She often lamented that she was named for a mountain in India. Heather James, a girl whose family had been from Jamaica, completed the trio of girls in our class that stood out as different. Thus began my embrace of multicultural friendships and associations. It would take years for me to understand the connections between Black America and India, beyond the often stated connections between King and Gandhi. Reading books like Prison and Chocolate Cake, Colored Cosmopolitanism, and Caste, I now see so many connections that tie us together historically and in present-day ways. I sat down first with my colleague and friend Mridula Bajaj at the end of the summer 2024. Heading into the school year and national elections, we got the chance to talk about our hopes for the school year and the future. Let's listen in. Well, I get this chance every month to talk to someone interesting, and it is my delight to actually sit down in conversation ahead of the Black Asian Solidarity Conference with someone who has been a colleague, but I definitely count as a friend. Please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Hey, Joy, thank you for inviting me to this podcast. I'm Mridula Bajaj, and I am a lifelong educator. Been in this profession for over 30 years, and I have loved every minute of it. Um, Not just because I enjoy teaching, but it is a profession where I continue to learn along with my students. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, a daughter, and I'm a friend to Joy.
Well, I appreciate that. I think people don't realize that one of the content connections between us is chemistry. So, content chemistry and social chemistry, they go hand in hand. So, I feel it really a pleasure to get a chance to talk to you. So, thank you for that.
Thank you, Joy.
It is a whole thing, and I absolutely have enjoyed getting to know you, like you said, as a colleague, but mostly as a friend. I love the fact that you mentioned that we're a lot of the times on the same wavelength, and so that is exactly why I invited you to this conversation today. The Paul Robeson House of Princeton works to maintain the Robeson legacy and bring it up to date to the new thinkers and new listeners of the voices of Paul Robeson and the Robeson family. And so I wanted to take a moment to draw attention to a very important relationship of Eslanda Robeson. Now, of course, you know, I'm not very good at pronunciation, but I will simply say that Eslanda Robeson had a very dear friend, Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit, who actually became for her like family, so much so that when she was incarcerated, she sent her children to the United States to be with Eslanda Robeson in Connecticut. And it has been written about in this really interesting biography called Prison and Chocolate Cake. Have you heard of it? What do you think of that? Sending your child to be with a friend. What's that like?
That is very common in India, for us Indians, that's a very common thing to do. Uh, I mean, take me, I came all this way here too.
Yeah.
Uh, so that is very common. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, when she was incarcerated, she was a freedom fighter, fighting against the British colonial rule. And she did send all her three daughters here to study in the United States. And Eslanda Essie Robeson, she was one of the friends that was in touch with the three daughters.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting though, because I don't think we would say that we do the same in the United States. That is, send our friends across the world to be with people. And so I really one of the most poignant lines in the book was actually in the preface, where she says, "We grew up at a time when India was the stage for a great political drama, and we shall always remain a little dazzled by the performance we have seen. This is the story of its influence on our lives, and as such, it may interest people whose childhood was different from ours." And that was taken from the preface of the book. And I think, what will we write 20 years from now about our lives and the very interesting political dramas, but mainly just the very interesting ways that life is unfolding for us? Tell us a little bit about who Mridula is and what life has been like. You said you came to the United States, but what was like in India around family and friends?
I had a great childhood, Joy. My dad was in the Indian Army. My mom was a school teacher. And my mom was very clear ever since she married my dad that she was not going to stay alone. So whenever he moved, she moved with him and when my sister and I, we were born, we moved with them. So I've had some people would say a nomadic kind of a childhood, moving from place to place, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Growing up in army bases, I also went to Catholic school. And in the army, you are growing up surrounded by people from all different faiths. So I have had a very, as some people might call it, a cosmopolitan upbringing.
I love that, because the cosmopolitan upbringing is now what we would call global, a global upbringing or a global mindset. So
Right.
I think about that all the time, and how the world used to be seen as these nations so far apart, but it's coming together. What
Yes.
do you think about globalism and storytelling and sharing of our lives in this way?
I think that's very important, because human beings are the most interesting organisms. And, getting to know each other I don't know, I find it very fascinating. And I always enjoy meeting new people, learning about their cultures, which was one of the things that I took for granted while being in India. You'd asked me about family. In India, we hold family very dear. Yeah, and it's like, before I came to the United States 23 years ago, I had never heard of guidance counselors or psychologists in school. Our extended family was our counselors and our, psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever you want to call them. When I got married, I went into a family where the grandmother, the parents, my husband and I, plus his brother and his family, all lived under the same roof. It was a huge house, and we all lived together. Of course, each
Mhm.
person had their own life, but for dinner, we all, the entire huge family, joint family as it is called in India, we sat together. That was one meal we shared together. Each one shared their day, with the rest of the family, and it was a great bonding experience. So when you talk about children, my brother-in-law's three children, they were like my own children.
Mm,
you
mm.
know I mean, they were
Yeah.
more with us than with their uncle and aunt rather than with their own parents.
Well, see that's something again, we have a friend in common who just celebrated her 50th birthday. And I had been to events, but nothing like this, where each family member is known with a very specific positional name or label. Like you would know who you're talking about and their relationship to you by what you called them.
Yeah.
And that to me speaks volumes about the importance of these very tightly knit
Mhm.
cultures that say, listen, this is who you are, and others will know how I know you and how I love you and why I care for you by the way that I call you. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I love it because the relationships are, you don't have to ask anybody, okay, when you're calling somebody your uncle, how is this person related to you? Because just by the form of greeting, how you're calling that person, the relationship is very clear, whether this uncle is your father's brother or your mother's brother.
I love that. I love that because to me, that's the way that we all begin to fully understand why relationships are important, because it says, listen, I'm connected to you in this very specific way. I know I think about often how we used to talk about why multicultural education was so important, for example. And to me, this inches us closer to a transformative understanding of how people are connected. One of the reasons why we need multicultural education is because, without it, we dehumanize each other. And I think that is a key point, which is why in September, I try to always do some kind of education feature for the podcast, because we're thinking about school. So where are you in your thinking now about how diversity education and multicultural education could evolve in the next 10 to 20 years?
Joy, like I said, I grew up in an atmosphere where, I was living with, literally, interacting with people from different religions. So for me, when I came to the US, it was actually a cultural shock that there were so many divisions and
Mm,
people were not tolerant of other cultures or religions. That
mm,
was a huge shock for me.
mm,
So these past 23 years have been a learning experience for me, that the entire world is not the way my childhood was.
mm,
And because I was brought up in that atmosphere, I hold that very dear. Because, look, let's be, if you want to take a lighter look at this, every religion has so many festivals. Festivals are a fun thing. Why should I
mhm.
only enjoy one festival when I can enjoy them all? And
Yes.
learning about them, and as I started on this journey of learning more intentionally, learning about all the cultures, as I did that work in Princeton. I realized that we might call the different religions by different names or whatever, but when you look down, most of the practices, the religions are talking about the same thing.
Mhm,
Christians have a festival of light, Hindus have a festival of lights, and
mhm,
so do Muslims have a festival of lights. There is a festival of lights in every culture,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
Jewish people have a festival of lights.
Right.
So if you dig deep down, I mean, ultimately we are all human beings, and
That's
that is
it.
what is most important.
That's it. I think one of the most remarkable um, quotes or things that Paul Robeson demanded is that we be treated with dignity and respect. And
Mhm.
that means we be treated as human beings worthy of consideration. And so I 100% agree. Well, I don't want to keep you much longer, but I can't help on the night of the debate to ask you about Kamala Harris, not so much because I care about your political positioning, but as we approach the Black and Asian Solidarity Conference in October, I'm like, she becomes for me the perfect model because I think most folks, when they think about Asian culture, they think of one, maybe two different types of identity. She, like so many others, represents this beautiful history. What do you, and history of progress, that is to say, that Black folks and Asian folks have diasporas, and these diasporas get to come together and actually become change makers. What are your thoughts about Black and Asian cultures getting together to change the world?
Oh, I'm excited, Joy, and not just because of her heritage as a Black Asian woman. I'm going to stick to just the woman part, okay? Just the woman part, because
Yes.
this is another thing that amazes me about the United States. For we are supposed to be the most progressive modern country in the entire world, but till date, we have not elected a woman to the top position. Whereas, even back home in India, we had a woman as a prime minister in the
Mhm.
70s, Indira Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter. Okay?
Was that
We
like almost 60 years ago? Jeez, Louise.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
I mean,
wow.
look at the so-called third world countries. They have elected women as to power, whereas United States is still not ready to elect a woman as a to the top position because I don't know the definition of power, strength, manliness. I don't know whatever you want to call it. It
Mm.
still amazes me and confuses me.
Yeah, me too. It's so interesting because that's always there, but it's not for me. It's always there that, oh my gosh, she the fact that we're saying she is a candidate for president. But
Okay.
it has been my delight to talk to you, Mridula. I really miss seeing you on a daily, and I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Joy. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Please enjoy the sound of Paul Robeson's I'm Gonna Tell God All of My Troubles, recorded in 1940. I also got a chance to sit with Not in Our Town Princeton board member Sindu Xirasagar to catch up after her retirement as a technology professional. The Paul Robeson House of Princeton celebrates the work of Not in Our Town Princeton as a vitally important social justice organization in the region. Their work with continuing conversations has transformed the local community as it sustains a vision of equity and dignity for humanity that aligns with our own mission. Our midday conversation reminded me of what could have been a tea time talk between friends, the kind that Eslanda Robeson might have had with Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit, one of her dear friends. Serious and filled with hope, the kind of conversation that you leave feeling inspired and ready to mobilize for change. Let's listen in.
I'm Sindu Xirasagar, and I am retired from the tech industry. I live in Basking Ridge, but I work with the Princeton community to address racial justice issues. There's a group called Not in Our Town Princeton, which is a multi-faith, multiracial group dedicated to this. And I am on the board of Not in Our Town Princeton. And we also have a Truth and Transformation Committee, believing that we have to understand the truth of what has happened in our communities in order to be able to transform ourselves to a truly multiracial um, community.
Well, I love the way that you said that. That it's not just a single community, but communities, right? And getting to the point where we understand the truth of change and the truth of justice and why they need to be truly multicultural, multi faith, multi linguist, multi everything. We need to celebrate diversity because that's the only way that I think that we're going to make any progress. And so the work that Not in Our Town does is critical. I mean, at the Paul Robeson House, we see Not in Our Town as a critical friend in the work that we have to do in the state and in the nation to change the way things happen. But what I love is that as an educator and as someone who's committed to racial literacy, I often tap into the resources that Not in Our Town provides because it's able to draw people from all over the state, but also from all over the map, if you will, of beliefs. And so the work that you all are doing now around truth and reconciliation is transformative and has been that way for years. So what do you think is the most pressing issue of this moment that needs to happen?
I think the most important issue in my mind is education. I think we all need to have a collective understanding of history, some truths that have happened, however unpleasant the truth, however sometimes traumatizing the truth, right? We need to all understand it. And that goes, I think, for the people who have been born and brought up here, multi-generational perhaps, but also people like me. I'm from India. I'm an Indian immigrant. I came here 40 years ago, but for the first 30 years or so, I realized I didn't make a whole lot of attempt to actually understand the true history of the country. Because I took it at face value, what the news media says, what the
Hollywood.
yeah Hollywood, yes, and
Yeah.
then also the history. I actually read a history book, but it really glossed over a lot of truths that are coming out or that I'm getting exposed to in the last decade or so. So I think it's super important for all of us to really educate ourselves, to really know where we came from, where this country came from, where our aspirations are, but then how do we reach those aspirations, truly reach those aspirations with understanding where we came from. Right? That is
Absolutely.
the only thing that's going to get us there.
Absolutely. I know in our racial literacy course, we have a framework that has us think, excuse me, about the invention of injustice, if you will, right? So it's a something that was created, and the systems that all of us need as humans were basically exploited in the invention of injustice. So when we look at economics and economic progress or domination, it's invented through these vehicles of injustice. If we think about housing, similarly, it's the same thing. And so I know that one of the biggest issues in the state of New Jersey right now is housing. One of my nieces, she is, late 30s, has a family, and she's like, I need to figure out where I want to live. For me, in my 50s, I'm saying, oh gosh, I really need you to get on every possible list that you can get on because I want you to realize that it takes a long time for these lists even to open up. And so I said, get on a list, get on a list. But in that same, as I'm hearing myself say it, I'm at the same time being very saddened that housing has to be listed, right? That people have to all of a sudden fight for the things that should be available to all of us.
Yeah. I was at a housing panel earlier this month, and some of those experts were saying that the US as a whole is 3.8 million housing units short of what's needed.
Oh my
3.8 million, right?
3.8 million. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. That's nuts.
And That's nuts, right? And that explains why your daughter has to get on
Mm-hmm.
multiple lists in order to hopefully get a place somewhere to stay. And we're not even talking about very low income here. And when we start talking about very low income and low income, the other thing that has happened is nobody wants them in their neighborhood,
That's right. That's
right?
right.
It's NIMBYism across the entire country, like in all these more affluent suburbs or exurbs, are really pushing back on that, Princeton included,
Mm-hmm.
and and that is exacerbating this housing shortage because nobody can build.
Yeah, because no one can build, right? And one of the things that I think about, and it goes way back into the mid 20th century, 1941, when Lyndon Johnson gave his speech of the Four Freedoms. That that was a January 6th speech, and he said, you know, as Americans, we should be free to do a few things. Most people are able to quote free to speak and free to worship, and I agree. But the other two are the ones that I think are really damaging to us in the 21st century. Every person should be free from fear and free from want.
Yeah,
And so, what is it that as humans um, makes it so hard for us to embrace that idea that every human, every person should be free from fear and want, meaning every person should feel safe. Every person should be given equal opportunity to thrive. Because if you have no fear and you have no want, then basically you're in a position to thrive. And I think the challenge of us in the 21st century is to reimagine how racial justice, social justice, human justice, and civil rights must be tied to these four freedoms. And so it's really interesting because I think that in the last 10 years, it's interesting because I think the last 10 years have been monumental in helping more people, especially if you were an immigrant, helping more people understand what it means to pursue justice in the United States as a person of color. Um, you know, it's
yeah,
complicated.
yes. And the US has a really very unique history that you can't imagine when you come here. And unless somehow I feel like we should have a mandatory uh, history, I mean, really the true history, in order to really understand why we repeatedly engineer poverty,
Ooh,
then we criminalize poverty, right? And so it's a cycle that we have done to keep people at the bottom, and it is so racialized because of the history of slavery and indigenous land appropriation and whatnot. But but all that is very particular to the United States.
yep.
And so you cannot apply, we have to understand that we cannot apply whatever we saw in our countries in how things work over here. It is just different.
It's very different. Correct. Correct. Because again, I think that it was easy in the United States to cover things up as people were pursuing um, the American ideal. And in its youth, what the American ideal was. What is democracy like? What does that even mean? And so to actually think that the United States of America is still such a young country when you compare it to countries
Mhm.
um, on the East, in the East, for example. Um, it's miraculous to think that this becomes the gold standard because it's not necessarily based in the mature view of nations who are really wanting to put the truth forward. So it's interesting because again, I think that we could we could get there. We could say we are going to be truth tellers. We are going to be the standard keepers because we are going to bear the weight of telling the truth. It's the potential of schools to be fearless in their presentation of the truth?
The People's History of the United States, which is a
Right.
really good book on all the work that the people have done to move it in a direction towards the aspiration of the constitutional as originally, at least the letter of the Constitution, no matter how it was practiced, right? So,
Right.
and
That's
that's
right.
kind of where I did get, I do check out those resources every once in a while to kind of try to understand a little bit deeper into these movements and things like that, because ultimately, like the work you're doing, Paul Robeson House is doing, it has to be people moved.
Mhm.
It's not going to happen from the top.
That's right. It has to come from those of us who are on the ground. I don't even like to say on the bottom, right? It's those of us on the ground who are turning the soil, right?
100%.
Who are going and saying, wait a minute, hold up. This needs to be excavated because the veneer is cracked, right? And so I love that. And I think that there's so much work to do. And I look forward to continuing to do this work.
Thank you, Joy. And it's the reverse goes as well. And I have to tell you one last thing, that I am in this moment in time after these election outcome and whatnot, I am getting my hope from listening to all the Black movements, the Black groups that are continuing to work and are like, hi, we got to just stay in the fight, take
Yeah,
self-care, but just keep doing it, right?
that's
So
right.
I'm getting a lot of energy and hope from that.
Yeah. I mean, the galvanizing force was youth. And I'm like, okay, from that time, 1947, 1955 till when I was born was nearly 25 years. So process is a key part of what I think needs to happen. And, one of the things I think about all the time, we live in a society that seems to favor fast everything, shallow everything. And they don't care so much whether or not something is done for systemic change. What I love about this conversation and the things that we've been talking about is that it's process. And so we're here for the long haul. We're here to make sure that change really happens and that it sticks this time, and that we are not going to ignore the history. We're not going to ignore all of the things that have happened just so that we get an immediate result, but we sort of build slowly so that the cement can set.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm,
Exactly.
mhm.
Exactly right. Absolutely right, Joy. And the other thing that these last few years actually have brought to my thing is that it's not enough to win. It is also important to be guardians of those winnings so that we are able to sustain that and then add more towards true democracy, if you will, right? So that I think we have to, these are the lessons that I've learned. And then also absolutely what you said, it is a process. We have to get the sustaining power and not just look for instant grat. That's not going to happen.
That's right. Got to sustain it because that's the way that it will live on, right? So I couldn't think of a better way to end this conversation. I appreciate you so much, Sindhu, and I really thank you for your time today.
And I appreciate you, Joy. Thank you so much.
Open the window, hear it coming. Here's another new day.
My conversation with Sindhu confirmed the importance of global thinking, seeing each other's struggles as your own. In 1942, Paul Robeson lent his voice to a documentary called Native Land, where through narration and song, he describes an idealized American day. We will end part one of this episode here, thinking about the life and legacy of Paul Robeson. In part two, we will sit down with Robeson House Board Vice President Denyse Leslie to talk about books and more as we continue our discussion about solidarity principles. Please visit our website for more information and to make a donation to the work we are doing to restore the childhood home of Paul Robeson.